Welcome back to my channel, everyone. Today we'll be making this delicious meat and vegetable Agda. So this Yemeni dish can be technically made with lamb or beef or veal. Today I'm making it using veal. And notice that these chunks are pretty large with the bone in. They're going to shrink basically after cooking it. So for the first step, these are cleaned and I am just heshwishing it, which means stirring it with some oil and adding some spices. So the goal is to brown it. So that's just one dried lemon, some bay leaves, a few cinnamon sticks, depending on the quantity of your meat, of course, and a few cardamom pods. And these are whole pods, so you don't want to put ground, and some spicy green peppers. Now I'm adding some minced garlic, few tablespoons, never hurt anybody. And I didn't have any fresh ginger, so I'm using grated ginger that's ready. If you have fresh ginger, that's even better. So I'm just gonna combine all of these few ingredients and allow the meat some time to brown. In terms of oil, I used olive oil. You can use any oil that you'd like. So here are all the dry spices, and you can see them listed on the side there. So I just prepped them ahead of time so I can add them all at once at this point. And these are all ground spices. So I'm gonna mix that all in. Alright, so it's been a few minutes of tossing the meat in all of those delicious flavors, and you can see some of the edges are starting to brown, and you want to make sure that you're rubbing the bottom of the pot. Okay, so now I'm adding largely diced white onions, and you don't add the onions until most of your meat has started to brown. And I'm just gonna mix and combine these gently, because the next step will be the slow roasting. All right, so at this point, I think we're ready. The onions are only halfway cooked. And I'm gonna add some water. So in terms of water, I like to cover up the majority of the meat, and excuse my birds that won't be quiet in the background. There's screeching again. And so it doesn't need to be perfectly covered. I would just say allow the majority to be covered, and then throughout the cooking process I shift them around. So I like to use a heavy pot for this to make sure everything is well secured. And now I'm gonna pop that in the oven, but make sure you use mittens because I almost burned myself there. So after about an hour and a half while baking on 350 degrees Fahrenheit, you can see that the meat is tender, but it's not completely tender. So I'm testing that with a fork, and I can tell it still needs at least another hour. The water level has decreased a little bit, but because I have the top on, it's not evaporated all the way. So I'm gonna put it back into the oven for another 45 minutes. 45 minutes later, the water went down a bit, and now I'm ready to add my vegetables. So these are peeled and halved small potatoes and some quartered green bell peppers and zucchini. Notice the zucchini size is large, and the carrots, I'm just being lazy, so I'm using these mini carrots. But if you're cutting larger carrots, make sure they're in larger chunks so they don't completely disintegrate in your sauce. So of course I decided to stick with the same pot. If you have a larger pot so it's easier to mix, that would be ideal, but this ended up working just perfectly for me. So try to submerge at least most of your vegetables in the broth so that when you put them back in the oven for the last 30 minutes, everything will cook through. All right, so here we go, back in the oven at the same temperature. And about 30 to 35 minutes later, I'm gonna check on them. So I'm just using the fork. The meat is very tender, and the potato I'm able to put the fork in pretty comfortably, but it's not disintegrating all the way. So now on the stove top, I'm just bringing it to a simmer for like 10 minutes to allow the broth to start evaporating a little bit more. And I'm going to remove about 2.5 cups of the broth so I can use it to cook my rice. So I highly recommend you do this. This is how you get a super flavorful rice that you can either serve as a bed under your dish or on the side. So here I have washed brown rice. My family's trying to avoid white carbohydrates, but you can go ahead and use white rice if you'd like. Make sure that it comes to a very rolling bubble and then cover it up and reduce your temperature to the lowest possible setting. Now the meat and the veggies, I put it back in the oven on broil just to give it a little bit of a nice browning. And that's pretty much it. Just serve as is and enjoy with some rice and perhaps some Yemeni Agda, which you can see another video of.